G'day everybody, Alan Andres here with a very, very special edition indeed of It's ZuTime. Running a few minutes late there, had to go to the bathroom unfortunately, so we're going to be transparent and honest, but that's just what happens. Today is the 24th of December, 2021. Today's edition is Season 2, this is Episode 4. It's entitled Robert Novak, the one and only. And I say that with the greatest respect, everybody who's tuning in. This probably will be one of those rare live broadcasts that you will see, in my mind, the great Robert Novak chatting. He's a very reclusive gentleman, and certainly it's a very, very special day today. Without further ado, I shall bring on board Robert now, and we'll get stuck into some really heavy discussions. Just hold the line.
Hello everyone, how are you going? Sorry Alan, there seems to be a problem. Your voice is coming along like it's slow motion. I can't really hear what you're saying clearly. It sounds like someone slowed down your voice 15 times.
I think a lot of people would rather enjoy that, Robert. Don't you worry. Is that any good?
Right now you sound like Shrek. Just give me a second, I'll try this on a different system. I don't know if it's my connection. I don't know how many listeners out there are getting the same thing, but I'm getting you with a very, very slowed down voice. Just a second, I'll leave and rejoin.
Rightio. Thanks, Rob. In the meantime, everybody, we'll wait for Rob to rejoin. He wants to hear clearly and succinctly what's happening. That's fine. Had a few people actually that have said that that they've had some issues with this streaming. We use what's called BeLive as our communication method there, but anyway, that's to come. So while Robert's going to rejoin, I'm going to just give the intro that I would want everybody to share in relation to Robert. As you know, in my 40-year journey through corporate advisory services, litigation, bankruptcies, just dealing with people, women and men at all levels, of all intellects, hardworking people, crossing paths with billionaires over this journey, I have never come across a more extraordinary guy than Robert Novak. Now, you know, you go through school in your early days, and certainly I loved, you know, mathematics, 3-unit maths. I love physics. Certainly loved research, particularly given the background that you're all well aware of in the litigation side of things, but mergers and acquisitions and takeovers and the thrill of the chase. And the IT space, certainly going back to, in my day at least, the early 90s. We're old people now, but to have come across the path of Robert, and you're going to hear this now when he rejoins, that he is just one extraordinary individual. And the knowledge and wealth of knowledge that he has that has been put into this project is incredible. So as we still, there are a few people now saying they've got some problems as well. So I can't help those people out unless you rejoin, and just waiting for Robert to come back through on the system there. He's not in my office, by the way. But I do want to send out a heartfelt apology. Now, I rarely do this, as you would be well aware, but I do want to apologise to all of our Zuccoin early adopters, those that have taken advantage of getting in early. Just hold the line, and I'll rephrase my apology shortly. I'll bring Rob in. Now, Rob, how's that? I can't hear you, Rob. No sound. I've got a few people saying the same, Rob, on this broadcast, but can you rejoin? Let me try. I'm not hearing you, Rob. Do your earphones have an effect on that, Rob, or anything? Hang on. Try and come back in again, Rob. There you go. One of those great things in life. It's probably a nice way to finish off 2021, I've got to say. But while we test that again, Robert's, for me, again, about the apologies, I do sincerely apologise that I was particularly so pumped up that we were going to, run through this release of the wallets as your Christmas presents, Christmas Eve. And for just a couple of reasons, actually, in working with Robert, that the extra week next week really wasn't going to make that much difference and gave us a bit more time to make sure that Robert, myself and Peter, three of us are working through the break. We'll take the public holidays, but certainly Robert has kindly pushed through to make sure that he's working over the break. There's a couple of tweaks that we want to do. Once we release this thing, that's it. I've been saying that for a long time, and we have had, people getting wound up about the delays over the last 12 months or so. But for that, I just make no excuses other than to say that it's the outcome of the product itself, which is the most important thing, and where we're going to see that and how that works. So that's from me personally to all of those wonderful people, men and women out there that have taken a giant leap of faith, have come on board. The good news is that you've been able to achieve an early adopter's access to coins, which will make you very, very considerably more wealthy than you would think in terms of the prices that you've got, because those coins can never be picked up again. There is the finite number of coins. What you have is what you get. The sales that we've had are certainly only been at $100 now. There's been no more in terms of discounted prices. Was all part of the marketing plan. And some people who have been a bit upset with things, I can assure you that the prices you've paid, we do have lists of people in a queuing system that would take those coins in a heartbeat at the prices that you paid, as being part of an early adopter. So apologies that I was getting pretty worked up this week in terms of wanting to see those wallets out. And once I get Robert back online, it might be an issue here with something that I've done, bearing in mind that all of my staff outside of Peter are actually on annual leave with the holidays. So it was a bit tight. And that was, pretty well one of the other reasons if we were a bit light on support. Poor old Pete and his team, they've got to work through. We'll try again now.
All right. How's everybody? Can you hear me?
Yay, now we're back, Rob.
I don't know what this live streaming thing does, but it seems to just every browser I've got open.
That's all right, Rob.
Firefox doesn't work.
We'll leave that to another team of developers, Rob. I think the other thing too, Rob, I just was saying to everybody in the intro there that, as you know, we had some staff celebrations yesterday, and really the team has been narrowed down. And thank goodness and kindly for you're going to work your way through with no annual leave to make sure that we nail what we're going to talk about, which is really just a bit of tidy ups and some upgrades there, Rob, in relation to getting it out in the first week of January. And I think we can all take a big, huge sigh of relief. That's been an unbelievable 2021, not just for us, but around the world. And we can park 2021 and put that in a little cupboard and get excited that we're actually going to see some action with the Zuccoins in that first week of January. As we discussed yesterday, it was far more prudent for us to play around and do a bit more testing next week. So, Rob, I was just wanting to throw some accolades out there. You'll be able to see the replay of this, and basically, I've just indicated to everybody from my perspective, it's been a long, hard, arduous journey. No less for you, Rob. You've worked around the clock, been extraordinary. And what I did say is that in my 40-year journey on planet Earth, which is nothing in comparison to a lot of people on the planet, but with the ups and downs and hardships and things, but people I've come across.
Are you only 40, Alan?
Yeah, well, I started, I was 50. No, that's what I did allow for is that I had 17 years of combat drinking, Rob, and then got my senses together. for that 40 years of business. But I think the point I just wanted to press, Rob, is that with that collection of wonderful and incredible people of all levels and business lines and the forte that they have in their own industries, whether they're high-level QCs I've dealt with, which are, very competent intellectual people, or whether it's, at the racetrack. The racetrack is one of the great kings of sports for the people. It's a leveler. But I just am absolutely fascinated from the things that you come up with your intellect in this space. And I don't want to embarrass you, but it's been bloody extraordinary. Learning curve for me, and some of the stuff you send me, I don't know whether to shred it first and say I don't get it. But anyway, enough of that. It's just wonderful that you've got this time together for everybody to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, Rob. So
yep.
I'll just go back earlier in the week, putting aside, the angst and things that people are wanting to get the wallets out. There's two people here that I know that desperately want to get it out, and that's you and me. But it's got to be done properly, and it's got to be done because, if you don't get this done in the way that we've taken our time and we've seen the journey, particularly in the last 12 months, Rob, you'll get smashed worse than ever. I mean, it's a dangerous space, this crypto space. So if I go back to Jason Ackermanis's interview, Rob, that's where we sort of had a really rethink about that extra time, not launching rapidly out tonight. Version 74, it wasn't much of a glitch, but it was enough that just tweaked a bit that you had to get into. Can you just tell the crowd what that was about that Acker inadvertently sort of fiddled with on that interview?
Yeah, 74. So it wasn't really, it's the smallest of smallest bugs. All it really came down to was when we changed updated the price of the coin across all our systems. We have about 4 systems behind the scenes that run various different parts of the whole Zuccoin product systems. We changed all 4 of them. Each of those had lots of changes inside of them. Inside of the app, there was basically just one little change where it displays the conversion of that price from 60 to 100. So the way the coin was transacted, how much was transacted, didn't actually change. It was only one particular screen in one particular order when you import a certain value that had to be updated. So everything else was fine. It didn't actually transfer any more or any less value than what Acker entered in that demo. It was actually the right amount of coin. So it was just a small conversion change. With the Zuccoin app, everything comes out of the coin first. So the coin is the most important conversion to get right, and that was working fine. The only part that we changed was basically that the AUD conversion just needed a multiplier change in one specific extra spot that we missed.
And Rob, so people realise that we're still on target. We're working our way through for a late February with the APIs I talk about for the exchange, Bitrix Global. But that feed that we had in that instance of that bug, that'll be a live feed that'll bring into play the live rates, which is what you need to make that perfect, ready for that exchange. Is that correct?
Yeah, it will be. You notice as well, if you watch exchange data live feeds all the time, you notice there's constantly weird discrepancies in all exchanges data. So all feeds of data that tracks any kind of conversion will always have some kind of discrepancy. You'll notice that some exchanges handle it differently. Some of them put in a threshold where they only check the amount every 1 second instead of 2 seconds or something. Some exchanges that are higher frequency, you'll notice the coin price sometimes can drop 70% in a fraction of a millisecond. That's where people get into fractional trading and all that sort of stuff. So what they use is techniques to kind of smooth out the threshold. And that'll be, as you mentioned, we'll start sort of getting deeper into that into February. We had a look at that a few times this year, and we did some work on that. But after we made some pretty nice changes behind the scenes to the system, we have to rework all that. But as you mentioned, in January, especially first week back, we'll be running some tests of the whole big changes to the system that we've done over the last few months. With first a few people in the team in the office, we'll see how that goes. Every single cycle we have a standard process, so we run it through a different group of users. Some of those internal, some of those the coin holders themselves, and then we run it through. We see the results. We check some analytics we have. We look at some logs to make sure everything's working fine, and then we expand that group out over and over again to more and more people. And then we check to make sure everything's still running fine, and we just keep increasing that volume of people. Right now, in the last group of users we have close to 200 people. So a big fraction, about 10% of all the coin holders right now are actually participating in the current wallet app. And it's going really well. As Pete's our head of support, and he's doing some really good work with it. He's noticed that 98% of people have no problem. It's just that 2% on some specific devices that seem to get stuck in a few places. And that's really what this whole year has been about, getting through those few percent of people. which may not sound like much, but if you multiply it up times, 1 million users, that's still a ton of people that are having these weird quirks here and there in this kind of a system. So that's been our main focus for the past year, really.
So Rob, and you mentioned about that, as I said earlier, I don't think you heard this, but you're kindly going to forego your annual leave, just juggling the public holidays, but to really beaver into, as I am, as Peter is, over this next week and a half. And our intention is that on the return, the staff get back on the 4th of January, and our intention is that with those user groups you've just talked about leading up to that time, post that, we want to, you've worked a way around getting the wallets out to, the 2,308 in rapid fire. And then there's a process that we'll take, which will pull it back so we can get the coins to them. And that should stop a lot of the issues we've had in testing. But before I get to that, so version 75, which had the recent upgrades, you're now into and busy with 76. So I want to get a bit deeper into that, because that's got some extraordinary, momentous upgrades that you've been working through, which really I don't think anything in the world has seen anything like this. What's happened in terms of the blockchain and the mechanisms and the way in which the whole thinking process of Bitcoin is happening. So what I'll do is I'll lead you into that because once you start going, it's going to be game over for me. But the coding side of it, if we go back 12 months, and the way in which you want to maintain the complete purity of decentralization, right? And I don't think people appreciate this, that every system we've seen to date evolving around blockchain feeds itself off some third party or parties that need to create that validation of the transaction between peers and also stop the double spend. Is that a fair call?
Yeah, it is. Most of them do. They all really, like, decentralized is a hard term. Like, whenever somebody says, here's a new decentralized network, you dig into the papers, you dig into the work, the documentation, and you immediately see there is not very decentralized. What they're really talking about in most projects is they'll focus on one thing to decentralize, just one little thing. And that's what they headline as a decentralized thing. But really trying to decentralize the whole part of the system as much as we can. And right now, obviously, Zuccoin and Zuccoin, the company, is managing this project. But bit by bit, we'll release that project to the general public and third-party developers to really have this thing be fully decentralized in every sense of the word. But it's really, really tricky to do, because by default, most decentralized systems tend to concentrate. There was a really good Bloomberg article, actually. There's quite a few of them coming out now, saying that a very small percentage of wallets out there in Ethereum and Bitcoin hold a huge, huge fraction of the actual circulating coin total. And same thing with miners. It's something like 0.1% of miners can control something like 50% of the consensus rate if they all work together. That's insane. That's not decentralized at all. Like, literally, you have a meeting with 30 companies that are mining, that are the big miners, and you can basically rewrite history on these chains. And that's a known problem in these other systems, these blockchain systems. So really trying to get to a point where the system maintains decentralized focus even as it grows, even as it gets more and more popular, is a really hard thing. And over the past year, as we'll touch on, we've come up with a whole bunch of ways of actually measuring how decentralized something actually is. It gets down to basically pressure systems and flow rates and all that sort of stuff. But we have some really nice algorithms that we can use to predict how decentralized something will be. And that's what we've been focusing on the past year.
So now that you've delved just a little bit, touching on the surface there, Rob, version 76, which is what we are, or you are more so, and Peter, we just see it from a user experience next week, the final testing, which is why we held back from tonight. But if you think about that, for me, there's sort of three components of the software coding that you're doing. One is your stock standard way in which your wallet operates. So you're centralizing that, because that's where you can do instant upgrades. And I think people are well aware. I've talked about the genius of what you come up with the PWA, which means that, even those updates we're pushing through, from 74, 75 and coming to 76, it's an instant across the whole system. We don't need to explain it to anybody.
No.
So that's what you've been focused on as well, when we had that issues with the SMSing, and Peter had it with the people's responses and what they were doing. That sort of isolated itself into that. You've done some work to get rid of that error effect.
Yeah, we've kind of changed quite a lot of the flow of how the actual app works. It'll look similar. It'll look in parts very, very similar to how the current 74, 75 version app looks. But behind the scenes, a lot will change, and a lot will change very subtly in the transaction process. I don't know how much we're going to go into the technical side, but basically, right now in the transaction process, there's a one-time kind of like a code that expires that you have to actually send to someone during a transaction. That's really, really good technique we found to actually validate something at that time in real time, and also to minimize spam. Because right now, there's a big problem happening with a bunch of these centralized networks where people are just jamming up the network by spamming things out. It's happened recently in Solana. It's happened with Cardano. It's happened with the new version of Ethereum that's being rolled out over the past few months, over a few years, actually. So we have this technique there to try and stop that. We've thought about that for a while, and it seems to work pretty good so far. And we'll know that in January as we roll it out to more users, how it's going to go.
So just from a wallet perspective, Rob, we're happy, we're content that you're going to do some fine work there. You know, the contacts and favorites and things, the way that stores, that's not an issue. But they're not, you know, bugs. Excuse me, they're not bugs that are of any great consequence. That's just upgrade. But you were telling me yesterday at lunch that other people will be able to feed off the back of this whole system and have their own wallets anyway.
Yeah, so really, the Zuccoin, I think the way we spoke about this yesterday and over the past year actually, is going to be that Zuccoin, the company, will be like an organization or a foundation. Like we'll pioneer our way of doing things, kind of like how Google pioneers how Android does things. And then we'll have like an official version. If you want to use our app, you can use our app for your wallet, or you can basically get it off any other third party who may have different features or different focuses for those wallet apps. And we'll do the same thing with the network. So the network will eventually evolve into just a series of protocols. Right now, it's a fully enclosed system that you can run on some specific, really, really cool projects that we're actually partnering with and working with and integrating with. But in the future, it will be any kind of system that just follows the protocols, really. And that's not too far away.
No. And now that leads me to the second little package, which is the one you can start to delve in fairly deep if you like. And that's the nature of what you've created. And you don't like using that word decentralized, but it is. It's either autonomous or it's independent of anybody that could, you know, whether you're talking about proof of stake, where the stakeholders have got some leverage, or you're talking about the miners collectively, or some recent forking and stuff that goes on with the software developers. I think that program that you got me to watch, you know, Cryptopia, Bitcoin blockchain, was a very good insight into that space. But now we get to the genius part of how you have created this, what we call the proof of peer, at the level from the peer's wallet perspective. Can you take me through the way in which you've embraced the changes in the last 12 months to, you talked about, you don't like using the word compression of data, but you've certainly you can talk about the flow rate issue, you can talk about the fractions of the data, if you like, the split chain component that talks about how and hell the data that moves between the peers actually works and validates itself. Because people say, how does it happen? How is this possible that Alan can send Robert a coin, and what actually happens in that step, which is that decentralized step? Can you run us through that, Rob?
So the system, I should probably take a step back and go where the system was a year ago, because that's where we made some pretty big decisions and changes based on the bunch of users that were using the app at that time and the system at that time. It was pretty much this time last year, actually, December 2020. The way the system worked back then was that we broke the main blockchain. It wasn't really a blockchain at that point, but basically a chain of data that referenced other bits of data and keeps going back and back and back. We basically broke that up into small pieces, and that was the system back then. And that's how it worked back then. And that was really, really cool. A lot of other projects out there that are trying to get to that point, they're actually been struggling for the last couple of years to get to that point. We got there already last year, and that was working fine. But like I said, 98% of users out there. But what we noticed was that it's this really weird situation in cryptocurrency where people are trying to keep the whole history of everything back to the beginning of time since the system starts, for every single transaction, for every single interaction with any other peer on the network. We thought, you know, is there a way of just flattening that whole infrastructure so you don't have to have all that heavy data hanging around? Because we want to run most of this stuff on the phone or like very, very general commodity systems out there on networks, on nodes or whatever. So we want to make it very lightweight, very easy to run on all these different third-party systems. So the first problem we had to solve is there a different way of tackling the history problem? Like, do you need that full set of history right back to the beginning of the system's birth? And we found actually, you know, a bunch of different ways to do it. And we started working for the next few months after that, probably from January through to May, actually, just trying to flatten that history down to a very minimal amount of steps, maybe 2 or 3 steps that you actually need to go back to verify something. And then beyond that point, we actually thought, hang on, why are we tracking every single coin individually? Like, that's insane. If you've got 100 million coins, you've got 100 million data points now that you need to track. And of course, with that much data flowing around the network, it starts to concentrate. It starts to centralize in a few basically big validation pools or node pools out there that can actually cope with that kind of data. And that's what happens in other networks. You'll see it in every other blockchain right now that tracks coins individually. It'll start to concentrate in a few of these big organizations that actually manage the validation process. And that you can't avoid that if you're tracking every single coin. So that was another problem we had to solve during this year, which was that so you don't have a long trail of history, and you also don't have tracking of individual coins, but you can still figure out what coin does what based on who holds the vault. So you can still track things, but it's not tracking every individual coin. And that was another big factor we had for scale. We can actually multiply scale, more than 1,000 times just because of that one little change. So that brings us back to probably about the middle of the year, middle of 2021. And then we get to a point where we had to figure out how do we actually analyze how this network performs much more finely and precisely. So we had to come up with a whole bunch of new algorithms, really, and ways of detecting what the system is doing, because it's a lot more free flowing now. It's really much more independent of the system. So we had to come up with these new techniques called flow rates and pressure system. We studied a lot to do with how pressure works in different other systems in the real world, to actually bring that over to this kind of system. So now we have all these ways of detecting flow rates. So we have a very specific ratio that we use internally to actually detect how efficient the system is going to be at scale, at different points of scale, depending on how many people are using it. So we have all those sorts of things worked out now, which is quite nice. So we can actually very, very quickly figure out if something's going to scale to a certain ratio that we want it to scale to. But the other thing, touching on the previous decentralized question, is it has to be decentralized more than just a system itself, like how many people are involved or something like that, or how many people can prove something is true or not. It has to be more than that. The system itself has to be simple enough that anyone can very quickly start working with it. You don't want to be in a situation where it's like a lot of other big blockchain systems out there where it takes you 6 months, a year, maybe 2 years even to master it. We don't want to have a situation like that. We want someone, a third-party developer or a company, to pick this up, to look at it, spend a few days reviewing it and understanding it, and then actually start working with it really that quickly. And that's never been done in the space right now. And we also came up with a bunch of other ways to potentially optimize it even more. As you mentioned, it's not compression. It is not compression. It's actually just cutting down the flow rate of data. So we're just actually reducing how much data is emitted across the network in the first place, which has the effect of reducing how much is emitted, but it's not actually compressing anything. And we have a few techniques of doing that. We have like I said, a specific flow ratio we target, and we also have some other things we can roll out, but we haven't rolled out yet. We've just left disabled right now, just on the back burner for now. We don't need it. To do with geometric distribution, we can actually summarize 6 bits of data inside of 2, which is really cool. We haven't seen that done yet, anyway, in any of these systems out there. But really, it's like the way the transactions work right now. As you mentioned, it is a proper real-time transaction that happens, and it settles within a few minutes, within 2 minutes, normally. Actually, within 40 seconds, most of our testing, but in some cases, you do end up with that outer barrier of a minute or two. But majority of our testing so far has found transactions settle in 40 seconds or less, which is awesome. But yeah, it's a very different system to what's out there right now. There's nothing out there with a flat history structure, with no long tail of history going back to the beginning of the system. That doesn't count individual coins, and it really is real time, proper real time, where there's no queuing that you have to wait, 7 minutes, half an hour, whatever, for the pool to go through your transaction request. It's a very different system.
Just on that, Rob, so that the Zuccoin holders understand, from a user perspective, I still get to see in my phone, which is the capability allowing the transaction history to be with me. It's just that I'm not. There's no requirement for, in the Bitcoin world, 9,000 miners to replicate that block and data that keeps adding into it. It's
exactly
just what I sit on.
Exactly. So you have your copy of your history, everything you'd work with, and you can use that for KYC and compliance to prove that. If you need to use it for other systems, obviously some exchanges out there, a lot of exchanges more and more so, are requiring a history of what you're doing to actually exchange out into some other fiat currency like AUD or USD. So that's fine. So we've got that support in there, as you mentioned, preparing for early next year for when we do that integration or revisit it actually. But really, the network itself doesn't need that long tail of history, this network. And that's never been seen before on these blockchain systems. It's not really a blockchain at all anymore, like I said, because it's not a chain of things back to the beginning of time. It's a very, very flat system.
And of course, Rob, the light globe moment, bulb moment was that the reality is that it's the balance of the coins that's crucial. It's not what that related to that history. So therefore, you're only
yeah, exactly. You don't really care about the history. You don't really care how many coins you've got. You really care just about the totals. We call this internally just the total system. There's a few things we've changed how things work, and it's very subtle, but it's massive in terms of how the system works. So total is one, history flattening is another one. We've got pressure analysis out there. We've got flow rates. Gosh, there's so many things. We've got geometric distribution, which basically means, like I said, we can summarize 6 bits of data inside of 2 if we want to. It's not in the system right now, but if we need to do it for even more scale, we can do it. And the system itself is really nice because it's real time. It's properly real time. You don't go to a queue that other miners have to then verify for you half an hour down the road or 7 minutes down the road. And you have to charge insane gas fees. That's the other thing. We're keeping this so cheap to run and so able to run on commodity hardware that we can actually run this on all kinds of very, very straightforward third-party systems that already exist out there. That's a really cool thing. We'll have more information about that actually in the next few months. We want to keep it a little bit secret right now how we're doing that, but it's actually a really, really straightforward approach, and it's going to get mass distribution very quickly across the network.
So Rob, just take us through, I think it's 8 steps of a transaction that allows, 2 peers to actually, in real time, make it happen, that A, someone can't rip you off because there's no double spend, and B, the network verifies itself, it doesn't rely, as I say again. So just work it through, because you've got time locks and all sorts of things that have been put in play. Can you just tell us from step 1 through to 8, what's that process behind the scenes?
So really, we've got
coin transfer.
Yeah, we've got an 8-step process. So basically, the 8-step process covers the process of a sender sending you something, and that's that expires. So that's what you mentioned with time blocks. I won't get into time blocks too much because it gets very, very complicated with time cycles and activity cycles and settlement cycles. But basically, it's got all these different cycles inside of each time block, and you have to do things basically inside of that time block before it expires. That's kind of how the system works as an overview, very, very general overview. And what happens is, for most of that cycle, you are dealing with the peer directly. So you are sending them something one time that expires if you don't act on it in a certain amount of time, 40 seconds usually. And then what happens is you just go out on a network and you look for other things that other peers have submitted. So you're trying to find certain amounts of copies. And it tends to go much more towards the nature of how things work on the internet. On the internet, things tend to be more and more copied. So the nature of data is to copy, not to be unique. So this system actually works on that principle instead. So you look for copies of things rather than uniqueness. So it's different. It's a subtle difference, but it's a really important difference. And it all comes back to this approach of time blocks and expiries.
And Rob, when we talk about, you use the word we, the poor old guy that's got a wallet and wanting to transfer a coin, he actually doesn't see any of this happening. It's just that from a tech software speak, this is the way in which this process operates to create the outcome that the receiver and sender are both in a position to know that what's happened is legit, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like those 2-factor one-time codes. It's kind of like that, but it works differently behind the scenes, but it's how it'll be presented to the user when they use it. It'll look like a little code that you have to copy. It's actually quite a long code, but it's basically the same process. You just copy a code in, and that will trigger the transaction to complete and just check across things on the network. And the upside of that is, like I said, it makes it properly real time. There's no queue you have to join to make a transaction complete. There's no miners you have to send it off to and wait half an hour to get to the front of the queue, or charge massive gas fees to get ahead of the queue to process transaction quickly. Everything happens within a certain block of time that everything has to complete. If it doesn't complete then, and then it didn't go through. And it's quite a nice approach to how the network works with the peers. Like, the peers are doing things and checking things, and the network is doing things and checking things. So everything's trying to constantly cross-check everything. It's quite nice. It's not just the current system where like the miners do everything. It's very, very different.
And I think for those that were worried about some of the the delay issues, but one of the things that was concerning us was, if in the systems and leading up in the upgrades that we focus on, your greatest concern was that you could see people sending things to numbers that ended up with coins in Mars or space.
Yeah,
no
wrong phone
return
numbers.
recovery.
Yeah, wrong phone numbers, wrong keys. So that's sort of a UI side of things. We've done a lot of work to actually simplify how the contacts work, how you send things to people. We've really taken a lot of the difficulty out of sending stuff in a crypto transaction. Crypto transaction, most of them are still pretty tricky. You've got to get the exact code exactly right, the right point, the right time. We've simplified quite a lot of it, and there's actually quite a lot of stuff we can still do to simplify it even further. But like I said, we'll know this as we start rolling it out to more and more people in January.
Yeah, and I think the takeout of that though, Rob, was that it just pressed home how important it was that what you've solved now, and the way in which the two peers, the sender and receiver, deal with each other, you can't stuff it up. I mean, it's either going to clock itself out, or,
I'm sure there'll be someone, but
well, we'd hope not. So by the time we release in that early January, it'll be exciting to see people with the wallets. And the fact is that the engine you've created underneath, so to speak, is accommodating that. If you send it to somebody, it's going to hit its target, and it's still going to be validated through the system, independent of any attributes of the miner concept.
Yeah, it's really like I said, we got quite a lot we'll reveal when the new imperative paper. The imperative paper is going to be overhauled, by the way, anyone listening. The current one is pretty out of date. It's about a year old, but we've wanted to focus on this new system first, make sure we've got that nailed. But you'll see when the new documentation and paper gets revealed how different this system is and how unique it is. There's nothing really out there that does this sort of stuff.
So, I mean, that was one of the questions that came through, actually, Rob, was the, why is the wallet superior to other cryptocurrencies? And I think, if you go back to that simplicity, your answer to that, Rob, is given all the work that you've done, if you were to tell everybody why is it better than the other cryptocurrencies, and let's point our finger at Bitcoin, just give us a quick summation of that.
Well, one of the things we wanted to focus on, even back since the start of the project, was to not have power concentrate. One of the problems with current cryptocurrencies is that the power is concentrating inside miners, inside coin holders, that there's a smaller and smaller number of people who own more and more of the coins and have bigger say of the network. Like a lot of these networks now are switching over to proof of stake. You'll probably see in the news last few years, people are talking about it more and more. And all that is basically the more coins you have, the more say you have on a network. And that's not a good thing. That's really, you can buy your way to the top. If you really want a proper decentralized system, you have to cover all these different points, and there's dozens and dozens of them. And one of them is that every single person on a network should have an equal say on the network. And you have to maintain that for as long as possible, no matter how big the network is.
And certainly that was the success of the testings that you've achieved through exactly that point. That is that, you come back to the flow rates, and you come back to the balance of the coin, you come back to no transactional histories. I mean, that's been the evolution of the Zuccoin as a result of, every point that we've taken with heavy testing through it to get to this where we are today.
Exactly. Some of it's really subtle. Like some of it you wouldn't realize. Like if you go back, speaking, as you mentioned, Bitcoin, you look back at some of Satoshi's original papers, like from 10, 12, 13 years ago, like he never predicted some of the things that are going to happen that are happening now in those ecosystems where he assumed that everybody would have an equal chance to mine. And they kind of do, but not really anymore. Like technically you can mine on a laptop, but it doesn't really work. It's pointless right now. And one of the things is really like all these subtleties where like if you have a system that emits a lot of data during every transaction, eventually it's going to accumulate, especially if you have to keep all that data stored somewhere back since the beginning of the system began, like all blockchains do right now out there. Like that will cause a concentration of power just by its nature of that. But the fact that there's more and more data being emitted and has to be stored somewhere to prove it somewhere, like that's going to result in concentration. There's no avoiding that. So one of the subtle details we did, like I said, one of the first things we did almost a year ago now was look at the approach of not having long tail of histories and just have flat histories. And lots of other things we did as well, like totals. Totals was another big one. You reduce the amount of data that's emitted across the network, and you actually can scale it in a much more properly decentralized way.
And that was the key. So the element of speed, scalability, no fees, no charges. And am I right in saying that Alan Enders, as a peer, he's got his phone, he's got his wallet. I'm almost a walking host and server as a result of this network you created. I become
almost not quite, because there are certain restrictions on phones and things like that where you can't run it as a full-blown server. Like a full-blown server will always be better. But a phone is doing quite a lot of the transaction work. Like more than half of the transaction is actually being done by the phone itself, which is really cool. There's no system out there that really does that at scale. Like I said, the way the sender initiates a transaction, it's all being done from the sender's phone to the peer's phone. What the peer is looking for at the end of it is looking for copies of things across the network. And that's where the second part comes into it. But more than half the transaction is actually running straight from peer to peer on phone to phone, which is really cool.
And again, Rob, so everybody understands, the peer that's receiving it isn't actually out there looking in person. It's the algorithms and the software code that's doing the heavy lifting. All I see is that a little clock is ticking away for 40 seconds and miraculously the transaction has occurred. It's been validated. There's no question about it being not a double spend. I'm a legit party to the network and I do own that precious commodity being that coin.
Yeah, it's one of the tricky balances with the app and sort of the UI. Like in the current UI, we just had a loading symbol, which looked very simple. Like it just would sit there loading, like with the loading screen just circling. And some people thought it froze. So it's like we actually made it too simple in some parts. We have to actually show people a bit more information so they can actually see that it's actually doing stuff behind the scenes. Like all this complicated stuff, this 8-step process for the transaction, all these finding copies on networks out there and other peers, data that has been submitted, like that's all happening behind the scenes. We have to actually surface a bit more of it in the app. And that's what we're kind of working on now between now and January.
And Rob, I want to get to the next bit, the third bit, which is the network itself. I don't, under instructions as the founder, I don't want you to tell anybody exactly how it works because there's some nice secret sauce in it. And I think what happens if you mention that one word as to how you've ingeniously come up with it, everybody will think, shit, how come we didn't think of it? It's a bit like Velcros, really, isn't it, Rob?
Yeah.
You wake up and then all of a sudden, and I often think of the Velcros issue, shit, will that work? But it does. And the penny will drop when this open source code gets to the market as to the amazing thing you've done to make sure that no one can bring down the network. It's 24/7. And stop me if I'm talking waffle here because you're the one that's built the damn thing. But that's the power of, we don't need to have a country like Iceland, for example, trying to slow down crypto processing. And the way they did that was to turn off the electricity so that the miners didn't have their computers. Now, that cannot happen with a Zuccoin bunch of peers running around 24/7 with the network. So if you can describe the network without revealing the bloody name of the thing, that would be great. Is that possible?
So I might as well, again, take a step back on how we actually came up with this. I won't say how exactly, but what we did was we needed a situation where when we were running the app back in August, September, October, we had a bunch of rigs set up to test things and run things different ways in different scenarios, different situations. And we noticed that in some cases, this is what we noticed last year as well with the current group of users who are using the current wallets, is that sometimes people aren't online long enough to actually complete a transaction. Like by that, I mean, they don't actually have the app open enough. And one of the things you'll notice is that on apps, on mobile apps, on Android and iOS, iPhones, is that if you close the app or even if you minimize it and go to another app, the app actually stops behind the scenes for most things. There's some stuff you can run in the background, but it's very, very limited. You especially can't just send out transactions behind the scenes, definitely not. So one of the things we noticed was people were thinking that a transaction's happening in the background and they go back to the app and realize, oh, it hasn't gone through. When these devices actually stop apps if you go to a different app, if you switch to a different app. So we came across a solution. We're like, well, hang on, what's the way of actually keeping this going even if you minimize your app, which is to run it on a different kind of a network. So we came across a bunch of different approaches. We tested lots of things. We had a really nice solution that was working in October. And that was when, some of the communication went out saying, hey, we're actually pretty close with this at that time. And we actually realized that as part of the decentralized plan, that even though it worked, it was actually not simple enough that most developers would be able to build it on it really easily. Like we don't want to get into a situation where it's like, some of the other systems out there that are insanely complex to build with. Like I remember there was an interview with Vitalik Buterin for Ethereum where he said there's only about 70 or so people. It might have been a few months ago now. I think it was actually with Lex Friedman, in an interview with Lex Friedman on decentralization of Ethereum. Vitalik actually said that there's only about maybe 70 people in the world who actually know how Ethereum through and through works properly. So we don't want to be in that situation. We don't want a situation where it's not really decentralized because only a small amount of people can actually service and maintain this system. So that combined with the fact that we needed a way for things to stay online even as people minimize the app, meant we kind of took a different approach to it. And it's a really, really straightforward approach, but it's not obvious. So you'll see that in the next few months as we roll it out, but it's going to work really nicely.
And just remember, Rob, you've signed all your confidentiality agreements with me, and I'm a litigant, so you won't be saying jack shit.
No, it won't come out of me. It will come out of someone else if it's not me.
No, very good, because that's that, and I think just from a perspective of this, guys, from your coin, coming back to the humble owner of a Zuccoin, what Robert's showing you is that the software processes and the codes and the way in which we're dumbing that down. So we've got two things: we're dumbing down the user experience and the way in which people can, those in the know, can review the code. You're expanding the usability of the entire network. And obviously that's what's the glue and the key to the bigger products you're seeing today that companies are taking control of, like South Sea with its NFTs as an example. You know, once they've got their grubby hands on it, you've got nowhere to go other than through that particular, you know, my words, portal or network. So what we want is massive explosion of add-on value that increases the value of the Zuccoin. And that's always been your main objective, Rob, since day dot.
Yeah, like we said, like decentralized, that's one of the reasons I don't like that word, because most people, when they say decentralized, they're talking about one specific thing that they've built for their system. Like the transactions might be decentralized, or the way the organization is managed might be decentralized. Like it's usually just one thing. But to try and do everything like across those verticals and cover all these things at the same time is a lot of things. Like there's more than a dozen things you have to think about. Yeah.
And of course, for us humble early adopters, that means one thing: you increase the firepower of what's available through the network. You increase the product lines, and I've talked about that through my earlier episodes. I mean, Robert, our head's been spinning with things that we're going to be doing post the Zuccoin release era, but you know, things that then lead to only one outcome, and that is the value proposition of the coin. It's got to be better.
No, exactly. This is probably like, for all the people watching and all people involved as coin holders, this is probably the most boring part of the system, most boring time in the system's development, because you won't be able to do as much as you can probably in the next few years with it. It's going to actually, once we nail down the infrastructure and the plumbing, it's going to, it'll be very easy to build on top of. This is all like the boring stuff that nobody sees. So.
Yeah, and I think,
but it's very important. It's very important, of course.
I think the gurus out there that pride themselves as being high-level intellect, software developers, etc., will be absolutely gobsmacked, Rob. It's fair to say, with the simplicity of the outcome of the network itself. And for those that don't understand that, if you turn the phone off, or you know, or you've backed up and you've done your backups and it's sitting there, and you have cold storage they talk about, and you protected the value of your private key for restoration later on. What Robert's telling you is that 24/7 you can reconnect to the network, and there can be no fraudulent activity that takes place other than verifying the balance of your coins. You can go away for
the network actually holds very, very little amount of data. Like this is something we focused a lot on over the past year, like reducing that flow rate, how much data flows across the network, making it very, very small compared to how many people could use the network.
And Rob, I did want to touch on then too the just a quick summary of the concern that I've expressed, but you can express in a software world sense, is the NFTs. You know, I see that as a train wreck, and how that we've distinguished that with what we can do because of the way you want to protect. Just describe to people what actually happens with an NFT in terms of what that is.
Yeah, well, NFT is really, it's just a way to prove that you own something. Whatever you sign, basically, you sign something and then you say, okay, prove you own it. Right now, the whole thing with art obviously is quite a big thing. With art and gaming, seems to be quite big with NFTs. But really, the way we see NFTs going is that it opens up ownership of all kinds of things. So one of the really, really cool directions I think NFTs will go in the next few years will be, and it's happening now, but it's not really done well. There's only a few companies doing it as well, so we'll be pretty early into that. Is being able to invest in not just like companies with a traditional way, but like in people and what they do. Like imagine there's a guy, you know, a busker out in Melbourne performing out in the wild, and imagine like in 5 years' time he becomes a superstar. That guy. Like with NFTs, the way the NFT should work is that you should be able to invest in that guy, give him a bit of upfront capital through a Zuccoin, and then he can kind of take his career to new heights. And as he produces more records and more sales and more streams on these services, for example, in this case, you'd actually get a cut of that, and you can prove that through a token on the network. That's really the way NFTs should work. It's not really working like that now in most of the time. Most of it's just people buying pictures made in Photoshop.
and the problem with those pictures, Rob, which you've told me a million times, is that they've got you can prove the ownership, but it points to some other third party again. We circle right back to control of where is that picture actually stored.
And the other thing is, of course, with the picture, it's not really, you know, there's a whole culture right now on social media websites called right clickers. So, you know, there's a picture out there, but you can just right click and make a copy of it. So it's not the right use case for it long term. I think it's just a short term quick grab to kind of get attention for that sort of use case for tokens on the network. I think the other problem is mentioned as well. A lot of these bits of images and stuff like that are actually hosted on centralized services. So if they go down in 10 years' time, which most of them will be, judging by history, most of the services that hosted things 10 years ago aren't up anymore. those pictures will disappear. So it's not really a good way to do it. What you really want is to use NFTs as a utility to open up investments to more and more things. You really want to overhaul the whole finance space so that people can involve themselves in more things without having to go through so much red tape. That's really the big long-term goal of NFTs. And the earlier people start to build on that, the better it would be.
And of course, again, that is another product value proposition that you need the coin, Zuccoin, in order to create that initial action as to validating the ownership and where that leads to with the investment.
Yeah, like I mentioned, we actually showed a bunch of the internal team members just how we can do this a few weeks ago, really. And we have a bunch of precautions already in the system to actually handle these different use cases. It gets down to a combination of something I've mentioned before, might have been actually on previous podcasts as well, which is that you have this combination. I haven't seen this spoken about anywhere on the internet. Is a 2x2 matrix. Imagine the 2x2 table, 2 rows, 2 columns, and one column you've got unique, another column you've got combinable. So imagine every kind of data, every kind of information out there can be summarized in one of these cells in this table. Unique and combinable, it's basically like it's money. You can combine $50 and $50, you have $100. It's unique but combinable. You can't have two $100 notes. That's double spending. And then you've got unique and not combinable. That's an NFT basically. It's something that's collectible, something that you can't have more of. And so you run through each of these different matrices on this table, and you end up with a system that can handle all those scenarios. So that's one of the things we've built into the system already, to handle all these different combinations of is something unique and is it combinable.
And of course, Rob, that's where, from a software perspective, it opens the floodgates for the products that I'm keen on, which is creating the certainty for virtual real estate. What I call, unique digital assets, and even the lottery. I mean, our marketing campaigns that are going to hit full throttle. We've talked about the augmented reality, the spinning coin, and how that operates. Each one of those becomes another add value, which increases the value of the coins.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's really just repurposing what we've already built out in that sort of that combination of capabilities the system can do. So really, once we get that side of it out there to developers, it should make it very, very easy to just apply this sort of stuff all over the place.
So I guess, Rob, when I talk big picture, and I'm talking from a commercial aspect, your head's always been in the big picture software space, which means that, unfortunately, everybody, there has been a price to pay, and that is time. So, the poor early adopters of Zuccoin holders who are itching to, see the market response and what goes on, we're a number of years ahead in terms of where we see it's going to be, because it does reflect what we see is bringing down. There's nothing comparable. As far as we know, Rob, you've got nothing in your head that's comparable with A, the system, or B, the coin, what you've built.
There's nothing out there that works like this. There's nothing. Like there are some people who are starting to work on, some bits here and there that we've sort of worked on over the past few years, but we've had so many new, really, really cutting edge approaches to things this year. Like there's 8 of them, just we mentioned this interview, like from histories to flow rates to pressure analysis to like geometric distribution. Like that's just 5 off the top of my head. Like we've done so many different things that people are trying to get to the stuff we were doing last year. Like that's how far this project is. We figured out how to do fragmented transactions, or sharded transactions as people call it. We figured out how to do that last year. Like people are struggling with that this year. Like we're already over a year ahead of the nearest sort of big projects out there. But one of the upsides of that is the more we work on the system, the further we can get ahead. And the tricky part is, one of the reasons that the other people have struggled with it is that because people are already using those systems in big ways. So it's very hard to make changes. So one of the upsides to us in taking a bit more time to do it this kind of a way is that we can move faster before people start using it. Because obviously, as soon as you get to a point where you have to start migrating stuff, migration and integrations are the slowest part of any development process, because you have to start handling compatibilities for things. Because of the way we've done this past couple of years, it means we don't have to worry about that, which means we can move a lot faster.
And Rob, you've an enormous amount of pressure. There's no doubt about that. You put in hours that go beyond belief. I'm always reminding you, even last night, everybody's gone happy, merry, happy Christmas, and you're still up till 3 o'clock. But you're in a pretty comfort zone at the moment, that we're ready to rock and roll. We satisfy the delivery of the wallets early January. That's going to be a massive turnaround for us, because that's where we get smashed. people don't see what we're trying to achieve underneath, and the testing has been crucial. I
Yeah.
think I had a comment from someone the other day that, well, what's the point of only testing with 2 wallet holders? Well,
We know. Like I said, we have a whole bunch of techniques and analytical tools we built up over the past few months. We can actually say, like I said, flow rates and pressure systems. We can tell ahead of time from 1 user to 2 users to 4 users, up to 8 users, immediately what the system will do when it's at 1 million users. We can immediately predict what will happen. Like, we don't need to run it in a real life environment to know what will happen.
Yeah. And I guess on the back of that, a question was said, well, can you actually put numerics to the time processing? I mean, I've dealt with card processing companies, for 20 years, Visa, MasterCard are the, because they've got centralized control they can process. That's a different kettle of fish. But, you're doing 5 or 10,000 transactions per second. We really can't put a quantify that, can we? Because it could be, in their speak, it could be 1 million transactions per second because of the way in which...
because they're a centralized company. They know how many servers they have. They know how many routes they have through those servers. All the different infrastructure setups you can have. They know exactly their infrastructure. Because something is decentralized, we don't know what somebody out in America or Canada is going to do with the system and how they're going to organize it. All we know is that it has to work a certain way with protocols, and that's what we can control. And the system has some fallbacks and redundancies. So in case those systems don't work enough or well enough or compatible enough. So the system is very strict in terms of detecting anomalies. But really, that's the whole point of a decentralized system, is that you open it up to different people running it different ways. And they may figure out an even faster way to run this network than we figured it out. That's one of the good things about a decentralized system.
Yeah, which puts it at what we want to do, that we're in a strong position, because as the founder of the Zuccoins, Rob, and certainly those that have got Zuccoins, which they've been able to access those coins at low prices, that's the upshot of being patient, because you won't get them again, and there's a queue already that wants to take you out at the current prices that you may have paid. We can't create more coins.
No, you can't. And the other thing is, like with the time factor, it's round the clock work. Like as you mentioned, like if people could see the weekly summaries, the technical summaries, it is like almost 10 pages of work, of reports, technical work every single week. That's a summary. That's just a summary. Like if people saw how flat out we've been over the past couple of years, it's insane. We may publish those at one point in the future, just for historical reasons, as we mentioned before, just so people can see just how much we've gone through to figure this stuff out. But it's definitely not moving slowly.
No. And Rob, look, I've been patient in all my stuff, if you want the returns, and still are. But I think the great thing is that we've come to the pointy end, the extraordinary journey. And again, sitting back and saying, well, just for the hell of it, we push it out tonight's not worth doing. I'm comfortable that we need that extra week and a half, early January. Everybody will be getting their wallets, and the excitement will be they'll be saying, well, what the hell we were on about? Because all they see as a user is it's gone from A to B and it's delivered according. But it's bigger than that. It's massive.
Like I said, it's going to look similar to the app that a lot of users have already been familiar with, but it's going to be different in places. You'll start noticing little bits of differences here and there. But the main thing will be the way you transact real time with people, and you send out a one-time code. That's the main thing I think people will realize, that it's different. But everything else is buried deep behind things we've hidden in the system behind the scenes.
And I think too, Rob, that you say it's a little thing there, but without the patience of our Zuccoin holders, that the early ones that got the testings, and the ones that currently, there are a couple of hundred that's running around, but without those people, we wouldn't have got to the bottom of issues that they had from a user experience, which relate to the way in which the network operates and has to operate if you want to keep this truly decentralized, which is what we've done.
It's exactly a good point. Like a lot of the problems that a lot of even tech startups have, and even just this program that we're using to live broadcast this thing, they only test it with a very small number of people, very specific demographics. And they don't test on different machines, different systems, different people, different ages, different backgrounds, different experiences. With our systems, our group of users that are using the app right now, we have 4 different groups of users. It'll be 5 in January. They're all different backgrounds. Some are in tech, some are not in tech. Some work in agriculture, some work in health, some work in finance. Some are young, some are old, some are middle-aged, all over the place. Some are used to smartphones, some aren't used to smartphones. It's all over the spread, and from that we can actually figure out what things we need to change. There's a lot of things we actually deliberately take out of the app, and that we took out of the app over the past couple of years, that were really cool, that a bunch of us internally really wanted, to be in the app. Like, one of the things is a lot more gestures. Gestures are really cool, especially if you're under a certain age. It's very, very handy to use. But for a lot of people, gestures are actually harder than just tapping buttons. So that's one of the things we did. We actually rolled back a lot of the fancier stuff and just made it simpler.
Yep, for that reason. And I think with the open source coming, Rob, people will embrace it and think, shit, what's actually happened? This is beyond belief, because we're not going to have a Chinese government shut it down. We're not going to have the hydro plant turned off for electricity. We don't need massive computers and all the rest.
We don't even need specialized hardware. That's one of the cool things we'll reveal in a little while. But we don't need specialized hardware. It can actually run on very, very commodity stuff that already exists out there in a big way.
And I think, Rob, for me, that was a learning lesson for me in this journey, is because your insistence upon bringing the power back into the humble phone, either iPhone or Android, into the hands of a person, which means that it's completely devoid of any third parties, whether you're the major players, the Googles and so forth and Facebooks that want to dominate this space. So
yeah, well, it opens up to anyone. Anyone can participate. You don't need, like I said, big specialized things to work a certain way. You can use it off all kinds of commodity things in phones and network systems that we'll talk more about soon. But it's very, very straightforward to start running and participating in the system.
And I just wanted to finish up, really, Rob. The my end dream of this. Obviously, people are going to make a killing. Bitcoin is still powering its way through $50,000 now. It's probably hit some bottoms there. But again, as you said earlier, it's getting harder and harder. It's getting more concentrated. The bigger players are coming into it. This humble Zuccoin delivers everything that Bitcoin can do, except it's got all the problems inherent with it in terms of where does it end up in the future if this blockchain is exploding beyond control. Not only the value proposition that we're attacking, but certainly the man in the street can deal with each other one-on-one. If you need to buy a bicycle, you can go from A to B, and you know that you've received a legitimate item because of the way you've structured the network and truly kept that mandate that you wanted, the power back into the hands of the peer.
Yeah, that's one of the things with decentralized stuff. Like, it could get to a point in the future, and we've talked about this before as a team. Like, it get to a point where people keep just renaming it to something else once it gets properly decentralized. And people could call it, Alan Coin and Rob Coin, and then behind the scenes, it'll actually be the same system and it'll be compatible with each other. So imagine, like, you've got all these different, like, people talking about city-state tokens now. Like, if you go to New York, you'll have a cryptocurrency that's just for you in New York. Like, but behind the scenes, that should all be the same compatible currency, like, across everything. Like, it just should be driven by certain economic metrics instead of actually being a different system entirely. So that's one of the cool things we will be able to do as a properly decentralized system, is that you can have all these things sort of looks different, feels different, behaves different, has different features, but it's actually the same compatible stuff behind the scenes.
And I think, Rob, the relief for me will be, obviously, I'm excited as anybody else, but the relief will be that once the wallets are in people's hands in January, and they're seeing it and the exchange is up and running, the freedom that you and I have and the team to focus on the big picture stuff really is the engine that we want to drive it, because it's the marketing tools we've got. We've got massive database. We've got massive, even your thoughts there, which I haven't even talked about, on how to get mass adoption through the QR code through to the spinning AR coin, and what you've got in mind for autopilot downloads of different value propositions in the coin is just mind blowing, because we want 5 million adopters.
Yeah, like you said, as you mentioned, like, we want to be the ones who kind of pushes this project, but at some point we also have to focus to make sure that that it really takes off from a grassroots movement, that we want developers to pick it up and use it in their stuff. And that way, it just grows like a wildfire, out of control. Like, we don't have to keep pushing sort of over and over again, where people just start to realize how easy this system is to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as I said, I'm going to enjoy the relief that people are making a fortune and the coins are doing what they're doing, and we'll continue to push. We've got 5 exchanges in total at this stage, but Beatrix Global, everybody, that's the API integration that Rob's going to complete for the listings. But if I look back at that, something like ZooChat is the experimentation that I enjoy with social media. Rob, that's really starting to get into what we want to be the front runners with, what they're now running around calling Web 3.0. Is that fair call?
Yeah, Web 3.0 is really what we're building the system for. So, like I said, with that, the Web 3.0 really comes down to that matrix that we spoke about that nobody seems to be talking about, which is it combinable? Is it unique? Yes or no for either of those two things will let you know how decentralized something is or how easy it is to verify something. But really, we can apply that to anything. Like I mentioned, ZooChat is just one use case, but there'll be tons of stuff in future.
And again, people forget that's one component of our business is ZooChat. Now, people laughed at me when I was playing with all the social media and taking on the trolls. I mean, that was a great entertainment thing for me. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Rob, as you know, we have big laughs and chuckles here in the office and everybody taking the piss when they see what I've created from all of the idiots out there. But there was a deliberate purpose for that, because if we bring back that we are the front runners in 3.0, Web 3.0, every single individual peer ends up a dominant position and control to make money from their own data. And that's one of our objectives.
That's one of the things we're talking about. So if we can integrate like the idea of what NFTs are trying to be, that you can actually open up opportunities directly between people without having to go through an IPO bank or an investment bank. Like you can actually say, hey, imagine like, there's a guy down the street who's starting up a new cabinetry business. He's worked at a place for all his life. Maybe he got laid off during the pandemic. We're seeing this happen a lot. And, he needs some startup money, and he could release a token and start a company in his new cabinetry business. And he could start building, all kinds of kitchens and stuff like that. And the people invested in that would get a cut of his business's revenue. That's really what NFTs have to get to.
And we're certainly going to be calling them UDAs, Rob, unique digital assets. We're making them distinguish there. I mean, I get the other thing too is we're conscious of, Rob, just on that, is the amount of wombats out there in terms of taking money and fleecing money through the scamming and the frauding stuff. I mean, I'm looking at the screen here now, and there's some idiots there trying to get people to send some Bitcoin and get a response in Bitcoin as though they're treating it as Zuccoins. Now, we've warned everybody, don't go near those commentaries. They'll be deleted later. But they're pretty persistent little buggers, aren't they? I mean, they take an opportunity, they see the coin, and then they're trying to, siphon off some money through that mechanism. I think I shared with you this joke we had about it yesterday, that even our office here, the team is working hard with a number of exchanges, and a top 10 exchange we ended up following through a referral, which is a very high level referral. And it turned, we were a bit suspicious of the contracts, the way they came back, Rob. I won't mention the exchange name, because the irony was, we revisited the contract. Something didn't smell right. And just before we're sending $100,000 to join the listing fee, we made some further due diligence inquiries. And in fact, we actually got the CEO and major shareholder of the exchange itself, who was horrified that people were scamming by pretending to be his exchange and pretending to list coins on a non-existent exchange, and we're making a fortune.
So it's a big problem right now. It's a massive problem in the industry. Like trust itself is a big problem on the internet. It's one of the things. It's one of the things. These like the fundamental problem that we're actually solving here with all these kinds of cryptocurrency systems is how do you increase trust without having to actually physically see someone and know, touch their skin and say, hey, you're actually that person. It all comes down to fundamental trust, and people try to solve it with different methods, like incentives and fees and cashback kind of mining rewards and stuff like that. But really, we came up with a really cool technique to analyze this stuff, and we'll publish this at some point in 2022, and how you can actually break down this problem really nicely. And it might be an imperative paper. I'm not sure if it will. It might be a separate blog post on our website or something. But it gets down to the fundamentals of why we actually built the system the way we built it.
And I think that's the secret stuff that's the genius behind it, Rob, because you've created what I guess is the utopia of what we want computers to do, and that is to remove the human element completely, either as inputting data, or either as controlling data, or creating those mechanisms to be rewarded, as you've just said. Whereas we can sit back with a Zuccoin and that it's real, it's moved from A to B, it's validated, it's in a network that can go on infinitum, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't. You can still have human stupidity in losing the bloody phone numbers and things, but I think we've come a long way, which is why that last couple of months has been, that has been a fantastic journey, even though we've suffered because we haven't seen the wallets, but nevertheless, it pays big dividends in the end, Rob.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think that's about it from me, Rob. I think it was just nice that we can put 2021 behind us. You've had an unbelievable year. I'd like to, as you said, those weekly updates that you do would absolutely be mind-blowing to people that want to get their grubby hands on them as to seeing the journey and what you've achieved to solve these problems. Because let me say it here and now, Zuccoins there's nothing like it. It really hones in on the elimination of third parties in whatever respect you want to call them, miners, stakeholders, whatever. The power of it goes back to the peers. Every single person that has a Zucoin and a wallet will be in a very powerful position to dictate the terms of how they control their monies and transact with each other. That's not to say that we're great fans. I always say, Rob, that don't be naughty. Pay your taxes, because that's one of the greatest attributes that I find in life now, Rob. As you know, I have a wonderful chuckle about seeing how politicians and bureaucrats lose it, and there's no accountability, which is incredible. Trillions of dollars down the toilet, and they keep printing that stuff. My grandfather in Hungary experienced a train ride where he started out as a millionaire leaving his town and ended up he couldn't buy a piece of cabana on the way home because of the explosion of the value of the currency at the time. So those lessons we don't learn from. But I think, Rob, you really are an incredible guy, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart from all the team. I know it's been tough on you. I don't even know how the reward system with you works, because you're just so focused on changing the world, which you will do. And I'm just pleased and glad to be part of it, Rob. So Merry Christmas, Rob.
Thanks, guys. Merry Christmas to you, Alan, and you got a few guys in the office right now. So Merry Christmas to everybody there.
Yeah, well, they're all about ready to get on the grog, so don't worry about that. Because I know you're more sensible, but yeah, have a great break, Rob, and thank you for wanting to push hard next week and bring this into the early January program. We can then get some relief with the wallets being everybody's hands, and then focus on the big picture stuff, which is we've got a huge agenda, and it's going to be a big 2022. And as the article said with Jason Ackermanis, everybody, this is the Bitcoin killer, no doubt about it. And I'm pleased that he's on, because Rob doesn't like taking time out for, these sort of interviews and things. But thank you very much, Rob. Pleasure.
Yeah. All right.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, mate.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Well, that was Rob Novak, everybody. He's an incredible guy. It's gone a lot longer than I'd hoped, but this video will form the basis upon which we can, look back and reflect. And his head's right in the right space. Again, apologies. I was hoping that we would really nail to see the wallets for Christmas for Santa. It doesn't make sense given the things that Rob wants to tidy up and do, and what's happening behind the scenes, which has all come about because of your great support and the way in which you've been patiently working through and understanding as to the implications of how big this is from the back end and getting it right. Because once it's out there, as he said, it's not like the blockchain networks where they talk about forks and changes and things happening because the software coders can get together, whether it's by consensus or otherwise. And that's why you've seen in Bitcoin, you've got Bitcoin Cash and you've got Bitcoin Gold, because they had little disputes as to how that network was going to function. We can't do that once it's open source and out and about. It's game on, and it's going to be perfect because we have greater visions as to how we can maximize the value of your Zucoins as the preeminent next generation crypto on this planet. And they're a big call, but we know what we've got under the hood. So everybody, have a wonderful Merry Christmas. Looking forward to kickstarting and smashing it in that first week of January 2022. It'll be such a relief that people will be able to send through some wonderful things about their excitement getting the wallet and transacting, as we are still working our way through, because there's a lot of work for us to complete so that you get that Beatrix Global listing and you can make a killing, you can sell, you can do what you like. We haven't changed the plans. The excuse me, the AR team are actually flat out busy to deliver our global marketing campaign that we've talked about, and that campaign is going to explode with the humble QR code. I'm so excited. I want to thank Thorsten in New Zealand, because you're the equivalent genius in AR as what Robert is in the crypto space. And Merry Christmas to you. I thoroughly enjoyed the changes you've done to the AR in the last 24 hours, so that you've satisfied my issues about the ease of which people can record video, take photos, and also share that AR for an explosion in organic growth as a result of those QR codes with the coins. And of course, as Thorsten was working through as well, and my son-in-law Dan in that team, that's an amazing combination of, maybe we're ahead of ourselves, because it really is the metaverse that we talk about, bringing the coins into play with the Zucaz and Zuccoin's world through that technology. So thank you, everybody. Just stay cool, stay calm. I'm as excited as anyone else is on the planet. Can't wait to see it getting out there, and can't wait to see the look on your faces when you do get the wallets and we put to bed all those wombats out there that want to continue to be doubters and naysayers. But that's what they do in life, and that's how they are. Big picture people, we've taken risks, and those risks will be rewarded, because the team is here working around the clock to deliver what we see as the next biggest, best thing. Merry Christmas, everybody. God bless. Take care. Look forward to the new year. Be safe with COVID, and enjoy the festive season with your family and friends. Signing out for 2021, Alan Andres. And this has been It's ZuTime. Look forward to next year, 2022.